So in this video, we are going to be covering 16 tips and tricks to gear up like the pros and massively speed up your gearing from the very beginning of the game all the way to the end. Let's get at it. The very first thing on this list is gear leaping. Now, this isn't that important in the beginning of the game because you are getting so much thrown at you. You really don't spend that much time upgrading everything and making sure it's perfect. But in endgame, when you start getting sacreds and then finally ancestrals, it becomes even more important because every time you get a good piece and you want to make it ready for your build, you've got to do a series of things. So I generally look at an end game right now with the item power max being 925. When I come in, I want my first pair of whatever ancestrals I can get on. I'm not too worried about putting the perfect aspect on yet because I know I'm going to get a higher level. I then look for about 860 is about where I'm looking. And then I do the next jump is going to be to 925. I'm just going to basically get as best I can for that slot. I'm not going to make small changes. And then I'm going to wait till I get a 925 that can replace it. And that's how I save a lot of time and resources. So to give an example of what's going on, I had actually came in here. When I first came in to World Tier 4, I actually dropped these. They are 860s and they had Ghost Walker, which is what I wanted. And it was a perfect roll of Ghost Walker. So it has everything I need. And so when I do get a 925 of these boots and make that second jump, I also can take the aspect off of this and put it on that pair. So it was really a nice setup for everything I needed, had the movement speed. It's just a really solid pair. So I got these, and though most of my gear is 925 already, I haven't found a comparable boot to jump to. I've seen some that are 880s, 890s, but I really want to wait for that 920, 925. So that brings us to the next thing. We're trying to save resources and still get our gear to what we want it. Let's say that we finally drop a rare item that has 3 affixes on it, and it's just one needs to be re-rolled. What order and sequence do we run things at that point? Do we enchant it first? Do we put on the aspect we want? Do we add the sockets? Do we upgrade? I'm going to give you my recommendation for the top that I have tested time and time again to see what it is and why. So you understand why we do each of the things in the order that we do. So the very first thing that we want to do is that we want to re-roll the enchantment. There's 2 reasons. Is because a lot of times if it's if you're trying to get perfect gear, if you're really trying to get that awesome piece, you want all 4 of those really working for your build. And if one of them is totally off and doesn't make any sense, getting that to something that does make sense is the first step to making that gear totally legit. So the second thing is that when you're re-rolling for enchantments, so when you're at the occultist and you're trying to enchant an item over and over again, if that already has an aspect on it. Now, if it drops with an aspect on it and it's already a legendary, that's fine. But if you're rolling a rare, you don't have to pay this additional cost. Right here, we look at the Fiend Roses is a cost that exists in this if you are trying to roll a legendary. So if I switch this out with a rare, bam, that cost goes away. So if you have that opportunity, and a lot of times we're just dropping so many rares that's probably our highest chance for getting a better item power and having the affixes that we want. So often this will be the case. Next, we are going to take it, and it really doesn't have a cost difference. It's just now that I have the 4 affixes that I wanted, it's time to upgrade. I'm just going to go to the blacksmith, upgrade that, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to then put back to the occultist and I'm going to imprint the aspect that I'm looking for. So this way, this point is the first time that it's going to become a legendary. And so the only thing that's going to actually cost different when you're doing when it's a legendary is this reroll of enchantments. Then what we do is we are going to put that on there, and now our item's almost ready. There's one last step, and it's not for every item, but the items that do have sockets, if they're missing one, we do want to put that on there and then fill that socket appropriately. So this takes me to number 3, one of my favorites, because it's a time in the game that I find the most enjoyment. And that's when I've just completed a capstone, usually at as low a level as I possibly can, because the real things are going to matter are when I get my build on point in World Tier 4. So the faster I can move through World Tier 3 and the faster I can get geared up in World Tier 4, I can start going after those pieces to really lock in my gear as a whole. So when you get into a new World Tier, there is a little bit of the challenge because you're running the gear from the previous World Tier that isn't as strong, and you have to get those Sacreds, or when you're in World Tier 4, you have to get those Ancestrals. So you're at a disadvantage, which I find interesting. So it's a little bit more challenging, but what's the first thing you want to do? Well, that is to get an appropriate weapon. So whatever you got to do to go get weapon drops to be that sacred or ancestral, that's going to have your highest advantage because it massively jumps your damage. If you can at least kill things, even if you're like killing and running, you can start to kill enough to either collect cinders and hell tides or really start killing enough monsters to see the drops that you need for the other gear that you're trying to gather. So when we're entering a new world tier, we have just done something generally, and it's completing the capstone that allows us to unlock that level. So what do you do for gearing right before you enter a capstone? You know, it's not a really good idea to spend a lot of resources upgrading every single piece you get in early game in World Tier 1 and 2 because you're replacing things so often. So what do you do to kind of get ready for the capstone? So in early game, I'm not trying to build out a perfect build. I'm trying to get a more powerful weapon and I'm trying to get more armor. So more DPS, more armor. That's it. Survivability. So when I get to that first capstone, I generally have not been trying to spec out for resistances or whatever. I'm not trying to get every item to have an aspect. I am just trying to blow through capstone as fast as I can. So for most of the World Tier 1 and 2, I'm just going to be replacing anything that's even slightly better until I get to that end. There may be one aspect that like really helps my build and then allow me to clear the capstone even earlier. Like in some cases, I think I've cleared the capstone 1 at like under level 50 or what, 40 under, I think 37 is the lowest that I've done it without, just solo, not with a group or anything. And so that was because there was just some core aspects for that build that really came together. But for the most part, I'm usually showing up with a bunch of rares and some aspects that don't actually do anything for my build. So the first thing I do is I kind of commit to whatever that is around 44. I just start kind of committing to the gear that's on me. Unless I see some crazy changes, I'm just going to commit to that. And then I upgrade all those pieces fully. This is especially if I'm running if this is my alt, I'm more willing to do this because the resources are a lot easier to gain in endgame. But if it's not, I'm going to at least take it to level 3. So I'm going to upgrade everything to level 3. Then I'm going to go and see if I can put on any aspects from my Codex of Power that actually help my build. So anything that has an aspect that doesn't help me, I'm going to replace. And anything that doesn't have one at all, I'm going to put a new one on and just look at what my options are. Obviously, there's no benefit if you only have a handful of those. There's no benefit putting it on 2 pieces. You really just put one, obviously, because it's going to basically it's going to overwrite that other one anyway. So now we're running with a gear set that's going to allow us to kind of clear through the capstone fairly well. I do not do gems. It's not worth it. Unless there's already a slot, I'll throw a gem in there because, you know, you break it down, you get that gem back. No big deal. But I'm not going to add a slot. So number 5 is kind of an add-on to the leaping thing where we don't just grab every little step. When you're in endgame, you're going to have the best chance at having the highest quality affixes when you're rolling items that are 925. If they are not 925, there is actually a lower range. Every level down from there, item level down from there is going to give a smaller and smaller range or lower range of what that affix could be. So if you want the best, you really do need to go for those 925s. At certain points in the game, like during certain seasons, basically fighting any of the bosses was dropping 925s. You could fight the world boss and get 925s. Right now in the state of the game, and always know what this is at the time, but your best bet is going to be running Duriel runs. So if you can either have someone carry you or jump in, as long as you have the mats to kind of help them out so they can do more runs themselves, then this is the best way that you can get 925s. And that's where you want to spend a lot of your time when you finally got enough ancestrals going on, if not everything is ancestral, and you want to really peak that gear. Do not waste your time on doing all the little things in between. Go for the biggest grinds. Go crush Duriel 1,000 times and get those pieces that you want. So the next thing I want to show you, this is one of the things, and it's just a sort that I do a lot, because as you're running through and you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to make sure everything is perfect. If something looks like it could be good, you're generally going to throw it in your bag to keep it later. So then what I do is eventually then I'm going to be sitting on like a bunch of weapon types of the thing, like my main weapon or whatever item types of the same type. And I'm going to have a bunch of rares in it. I probably sort of clean this out pretty solidly, so we're not going to see as much here. But when I get to a point where I have a bunch of rares to conserve on bag space, to make sure that I have the room to put, that only has good stuff. If I have a rare that looks really good, it's a 925, it has 3 affixes on it that I want, and just missing one, and then I see another thing that's like 860, and it only has 2 things that I want, I don't need to keep that other rare. I can break that down and get rid of it. You know, it might have looked good at the time compared to what I'm working on, but I only need 1 good rare to really upgrade to that full piece. Unless I think that when I go to the enchant, it's going to get too expensive to keep rolling that over and over again to get exactly what I want. I might have a secondary, but I don't want to jump down to 860 to do it. I'll wait till I find another 925 and then compare those again and only keep the best rare. We are at number 7, and this is do not collect all aspects. I know it's tough. Like early on, it seems like you have so much bag space. If you're only playing one class, it's not too bad, but you still will run out of space. So if you're like trying to grab perfect aspects of all kinds of things and you're not really thinking about what you might use and what you might not, then you are just going to be filling up your bag and you're going to be constantly sorting for gear, for space in your stash to drop stuff off, rather than dropping the best stuff you had out of your bag and then getting back out there after you broke down or sold whatever else. And so what you want to do is kind of have an idea of if you're only going to do one build with this class, know what things that you might need. Even if you have variants on it, know the aspects that are going to actually help that build and know which ones are not. So you can just break those down. You don't have to waste your time. Now, occasionally you'll want to actually look at building multiple builds for that same class, and you may have to check the aspects for that as well, if that's something that interests you. So just knowing ahead of time what those aspects might be that'll be useful for either the build you are running or one you might run with this class is the only things you should be keeping. Everything else you can go ahead and break down and save yourself the hassle of sorting all those things. Now, that also goes for if you were doing a different build, like with a different class, and you have a perfect aspect for that class. Again, knowing what other build you're going to do makes sense. If you don't know, grabbing everything just in case is going to just leave you with a lot of bag sorting and not a lot of playing. So if you're saying to yourself, hey Joel, I just have no idea what aspects, I'm kind of keeping them to figure it out. I mean, you can make that call as you go, but at any point where you go, hey, this is just not going to be part of my build, it's not going to be part of any variation of my build, then go ahead and start breaking those down and drop it. Especially if you're getting a ton of them. You know, if you see the same thing over and over again, you get a lot of protections and you're not using that, go ahead and just go break those down, save yourself for all the space. Now, I am going to show you something the pros do pretty much before every season to know exactly what these aspects are, and even the ones that they might want for separate builds or different classes they may be running this season. And that will help you a ton to figure this out. So tip number 8 is the best tactics for how use favoriting. So at the beginning, Diablo did not have a way to favorite, and now they do. But how do we use it? What's a good way to use it? Generally, what I'm doing with favoriting, because at first I was doing it like anything I like in my bag, I'm going to favorite. But it's more important that you're just showing the things you want to salvage, so you can one click and destroy everything, whether it's legendary, rare, whatever. You can do it all in one click at the blacksmith and break it down for parts. Now, if you start favoriting everything else, then you just have a bag and the favorite doesn't mean anything because everything you put in your stash is all favorited. So one of the best tactics I use is if I know I'm going to use this for my build, if this is like when I was telling you pick the best rare of what's available, that's the one I'm going to favorite and nothing else. If I have a perfect roll aspect and I'm not ready to break it down into the aspect of the imprint itself, then what I'm going to do is just favorite that. So when I go back through my bag, I know these have been earmarked for things I really want to use in my build. You know, things that I think are the highest level. If I find something better, so if let's say that I get a roll of an aspect that isn't that great, it's like mid-range, and then I get a perfect one, I might unstar the mid-range one and star my favorite one. You know, maybe I'll star both because I want a backup, but that's completely up to you at that point. But basically, you're not using favorites unless it's something you know you're going to want to use and you don't want to destroy. At least at this point in the game, you're like, I'm never destroying this. I'm definitely going to use it. That's where you want to use your favorites. So number 9 is something that has helped me basically speed up my gameplay in endgame a lot because I'm not worried about picking up everything, even the right things. But what I needed to know is what things that are on the ground are going to be automatically sent to my stash and what is not. And that wasn't always clear at first. So I was like kind of worried I better pick this up. And they highlight the things that are most important, but they're also the things that are going to automatically go to the stash. So what is included in that list at the end of the day? Well, you're going to get your legendaries, as is probably obvious for most of us. If you don't pick up your legendaries, then that's great. So if you're doing like a lot of nightmare dungeons and you just want to get through, you're not picking up rares because most of those are rolling 860 anyway, and you're like trying to finalize your build at 925, so you really do need to do bossing for that, then just leaving the legendaries on the ground and letting them be sorted back out to your bag and grab them there and throw them in your bag. And that way you're not picking things up, running back to go grab that start item. It's also going to include uniques, so that's great. So any of the unique items, same thing is going to happen. And then the last 3 things really are just all of the things that you do for your horse. So the different mounts that you can get, the different like thing you throw on their back, little mount trophies. So those are the 5 things that are going to be always taken to your stash automatically, whether you pick them up or not. But you have the ability to save up to 10 at a time. So you do want to grab them, just make sure they don't overflow there and start riding over each other. If every couple times you just go and grab it, throw it in your stash, it's going to save you a lot of time. We are at number 10, and this is using build guides, not in the way of just like following them step by step, but using them as a resource. So whether you are following them directly, if you enjoy that, or you're trying to do your own thing, one of the things for gearing that's really important is to look at what's commonly being used for different builds. Every once in a while, there's an aspect that just is crucial for making your build feel crazy powerful. And if you're just trying to figure it out on your own, rather than using all the resources of everybody spending hundreds and hundreds of hours on these build guides, you're kind of missing out on an opportunity to make yourself crazy strong. Cool. So we are on to tip number 11. Hopefully you guys are getting a ton of value. Remember, just even one or two things, if they are things you're not using, can dramatically improve your gameplay. So let's keep going. So we're going to start in endgame. I highly recommend that we start checking vendors for possible fixes that we are looking for. Because at the end, what you're looking for is really 3 out of 4 fixes that are exactly what you want for your build. So you can really dial that in. So as you get into endgame, stopping by the vendor just to check, hey, do they have anything? Is it a high enough item level? And does it have the fixes I want? Can just give you another shot at finding gear that you are actually looking for. So number 12 is gambling, not for gear, but for aspects. Because rarely do you get anything that's worth a damn when you're gambling in endgame. But it does allow you to control and try to roll for a certain type of aspect that you're looking for. So if we come over here and we just look quickly at the Codex of Power, you'll notice across the top, like if I'm just picking, I'm in the occultist, let me close this so you guys can see it. But I click on here to go to my Codex of Power, we have these types. We have defensive, we have offensive, we have resource, we have utility, and we have mobility. So even if they're not in the Codex of Power, each of the aspects are one of these types. So even if we look at, again, we look over here at the aspects I've broken down, again, the aspects have their types. So this is an offensive. This one is a mobility. This one is a utility. This one is a defense. It's got a shield. It's got the axe. It's got the wings. It's got the little trap. So that's how we can actually see it even in these. So if you know what you're looking for and you know what type it is, then you can roll you can actually gamble for certain items that make the most sense. So if I'm in with the gambler and I'm looking at it, I can go, okay, I want an offensive thing. Let's see, what is the ability I was trying to get on here? I'm trying to get ultimate shadow. Let's say that's what I'm trying to do. So if I'm looking for the aspect, I could try to roll it. Let's say that I was running double-handed swords or two-handed swords or whatever. I could go doing this, and this would cost me 75 a roll, or I can do any of these single-handed ones. So then if I'm rolling wand, it's a weapon, so it's only going to have offensive, and it's only costing me 50. I can get a lot more rolls if I've saved up all my murmuring obols, and that allows me more chances to get the aspect that I'm looking for, and it's targeted because I'm picking the item. So that same thing works for defensive. If you're picking armor, that's generally the case. Utilities can run on all kinds of things: boots, helmets, shields, gloves, amulets. So resource skills generally run on rings. So knowing what these are, and I'll go ahead and put a chart right here so you guys can see what that breakdown is. So number 13 is breaking down legendaries. Now, how do you do this as fast as possible? Well, you can do one at a time and have to read a little prompt and do all that stuff over and over again for each item you want. But if you've been cleaning your stash and trying to get a lot of space and there's a ton of legendaries you don't want, or you've just been doing some crazy drops where you get a load of freaking legendaries all at once and you need to just drop them off or destroy them as fast as possible, the easy way to do that in one click is generally first mark any legendary you want to destroy as junk. Then you go to the blacksmith and you just hit the breakdown junk and it'll all go in one click. Saves you a ton of time. So that takes me on to number 14. And this is something that I really did not take advantage of early on in my gameplay. I probably played through to all the way to 100 a couple times and didn't really use this, but it's so valuable. And it's how to expand the deeper information about an item. So if we look at an item and if this feature is turned off, we have our stats. But what's missing is they don't give us any additional information. The meta information of like, well, of that plus 20 all stats, what could it run? You know, is that a really good roll, or could it roll up to 30 and I'm actually losing out and I might want to go re-roll that? Or that movement speed, is that 25.5 its max? I think for this one, I think it's actually 27 with a high level item. But what is that range? Because as the item level changes, that range changes too. So if you don't have that, then what you quickly want to do is just come into options, go into gameplay, and go right here where it says advanced tooltip information. Click on that. We'll go ahead and save the changes. Now, when we come back out to our bag, we are going to see that it now gives those ranges. So here's the stats for plus 20, 15 to 27. So I'm giving up 7 points that I could possibly roll on that, and I can look at each item, but this has helped me a ton. For knowing how good a roll really is, even in the range of what's possible for that item level. So number 15, this is making sure you have a backup copy of your key aspects. So if you know that you're going to be running, so in this build right here, I'm running Ancestral Charge. That's very key to my build. I'm going to be looking for good rolls of that all the way through the game. And if I get a perfect roll, I'm not going to be using that right away. I'm actually saving that for my end build. Then I'm going to also save a second copy if I get another perfect roll. So right now I've got 60% out of 40 to 60 range. I've got a 60. So if I get another 60, I'm going on a double-handed weapon, of course. If I get another perfect roll somewhere, I'm going to hold on to that one too. So if I haven't got to endgame and I have 2 perfects, I have the ability to jump to about 860, which is pretty early in your world tier 4. You can get 860s pretty clean that have the fixes you want. And then I'm going to have another copy for my 925. And then I'm going to keep maybe one other copy that's maybe 60 to 80% of what the max is going to be. And that just gives me a just in case, if something goes wrong, or say I get that 925, I roll the perfect on it, and then a really awesome, like the perfect drops. And then I have at least something to put on it while I figure out getting that perfect roll on it as well. And that takes us to the very last thing. 925s are key to your endgame build. They are everything. And I mentioned earlier that we can get them by going and fighting Duriel a ton, just running the boss over and over again. He drops 925. He's the only boss that consistently does that. But there is another way, and it's a way that might be easier. As you are getting stronger and stronger, you can do higher and higher nightmare dungeons. So just pay attention as you're scaling the nightmare dungeons. At a certain level of dungeon, you'll start dropping consistently 925s. So know what that early marker is. You don't have to go all the way to 100 to do it. I think it's early, like in the 50s. You can start running 50s that are a lot easier to do than 100s, and kind of stripping through them and getting those rare rolls of 925 and really maxing out your gear. So that takes us to the very final thing that I want to share with you guys. If you guys have not done this, let me actually take you there and show it, because it is just so awesome how much this helps. A lot of times we are getting ready for the next season, and we have some downtime while we wait for it to actually launch. So what I do is I pop over to Maxroll GG, and this is one of the many sites that do this, but I wanted to show you this directly. If you come into Diablo, so now that we're in Diablo, we come over here and there's a D4 planner. So when we come in here, what we're looking at is you have the ability to come in here, choose your class, and you can start messing around with the different things that are going on for the build. So what are your skeletal warrior powers going to be is all down here. But the main thing is going to be looking at the actual equipment. So let's say that I want to look at what weapons that I could put. I click on this, it shows me the weapons. These are all the possible weapons. And it also shows me the implicits for each of these. So that top thing, the above, that's not one of the affixes, is the implicit. And so every item of this type is going to have that thing. So right here, this is a critical strike damage is the implicit, and then there's other stats. And you keep going down, life on kill, that's the implicit. So I'll go and think, okay, what I'm going to do, I want to do lucky hit chance. I'm going to pick 1. So that's implicit already has it. Now you can go through and add each of the affixes and start to see, hey, what do you really want to roll, and decide your fort, which is a good idea. The main thing that I do is that I come in here and I look at the legendary aspects. So even though I'm not like waiting in the game for something to drop and then trying to figure it out, I can kind of come and look at what do I think would actually work with the build. Now you can also do skill tree, Paragon, you can do everything, and you can save it. So you might have a couple different instances, or you might be trying to figure out between 2 classes or 2 different build types. But this allows you to do it, and you get some information back on how that actually changes what your build's going to be able to do. This can save you a ton of time of knowing where you're taking your build and then just making choices in the game. So if you love these 16 tips, then you're going to definitely want to catch this video where I go over 5 advanced tips most people don't use in Diablo 4.